Vincent Romano adjusted his black tie for the third time in 10 minutes, his hands trembling slightly despite his best efforts to appear calm. The grand ballroom of the Palazzo Hotel buzzed with the chatter of Chicago's most powerful families, all gathered to celebrate his engagement to Isabella Marconi, daughter of the city's second most influential crime family. This marriage wasn't just about love. It was a strategic alliance that would unite two empires and make Vincent untouchable in the underworld. At 35, Vincent had clawed his way to the top of the Romano crime family after his father's death 3 years ago. He was known for his cold calculation, his ability to make tough decisions without flinching, and his reputation for never showing weakness. But tonight, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and the scent of expensive perfume, he felt like a man walking toward his own execution. Isabella glided through the crowd in her designer gown, accepting congratulations with the grace expected of a Mafia princess. She was beautiful, intelligent, and perfectly suited for the role of a crime boss's wife. Their families had been planning this union for months, seeing it as the perfect way to strengthen their hold on the city's lucrative territories. Vincent knew he should feel grateful, even excited. Instead, he felt hollow. The problem wasn't Isabella. She was everything a man in his position could want. The problem was that 3 years ago, Vincent had loved someone else entirely. Someone he had been forced to give up when duty called and his father lay dying, demanding Vincent choose between love and legacy. Vincent had chosen legacy, and it had cost him everything that truly mattered. As guests raised their glasses in toast after toast, Vincent's mind wandered to a small apartment on the south side of the city, to Sunday mornings filled with laughter and the smell of fresh coffee, to a woman whose smile could light up the darkest room. Maria Santos had been his secret for 2 years, the one person who saw past the expensive suits and dangerous reputation to the man underneath. She was a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, kind and gentle, everything that his world was not. Vincent's best friend and right-hand man, Tony Benedetto, appeared at his elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "You look like you're at a funeral instead of your engagement party," Tony whispered, concern evident in his voice. He was one of the few people who knew about Maria, who had watched Vincent's heart break when he walked away from her. "I'm fine," Vincent replied automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. He had perfected the art of lying about his feelings, of burying his emotions so deep that sometimes even he forgot they existed. But tonight, surrounded by all this celebration of a loveless arrangement, the grief felt fresh again. Isabella's father, Don Salvatore Marconi, took the microphone to address the crowd. He was a stout man with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, a survivor of 40 years in the business. "Tonight we celebrate not just the union of 2 young people, but the joining of 2 families," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "Vincent and Isabella will build something stronger than either of our families could achieve alone." The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Vincent forced a smile, playing his part perfectly. This was what was expected of him, what his father would have wanted. The Romano name carried weight, and with great power came great responsibility. Personal happiness was a luxury he couldn't afford. As the evening progressed, Vincent found himself going through the motions. He danced with Isabella, posed for photographs, and accepted congratulations from men who controlled everything from the docks to the construction unions. Each interaction felt like another nail in the coffin of the life he had wanted, but could never have. The ballroom's French doors opened onto a terrace overlooking the city. Vincent stepped outside for a moment of fresh air, loosening his tie as he gazed at the twinkling lights below. Somewhere out there, Maria was probably finishing her night shift at the hospital, caring for patients with the same gentle touch that had once healed his wounded soul. He remembered their last conversation 3 years ago, how her eyes had filled with tears when he explained that he had to end things. She hadn't begged or pleaded, she had simply asked if he was sure. When he nodded, she had kissed him one last time and walked away with her dignity intact. He had never seen her again, though he had been tempted countless times to drive past her apartment or the hospital where she worked. Tony joined him on the terrace, lighting a cigarette. "It's not too late, you know," he said quietly, as if reading Vincent's thoughts. You could call this whole thing off. Find another way to secure the alliance. Vincent shook his head. My father's dying wish was for me to strengthen this family. Isabella is a good woman. She deserves better than a man who's still in love with someone else, but this is bigger than my personal feelings. Your father also wanted you to be happy, Tony reminded him. He used to talk about how proud he was when he saw you with Maria. He knew what she meant to you. That was before everything changed, Vincent replied, his jaw tightening. Before the Torino family started pushing into our territory, before we needed every advantage we could get. This marriage secures our eastern borders and gives us access to Marconi's shipping connections. It's business. But even as he said the words, Vincent knew they felt like ash in his mouth. He had built walls around his heart so high that sometimes he wondered if anything could ever break through them again. Maria had managed it once, but that seemed like a lifetime ago. The sound of laughter drifted from inside, reminding him of his obligations. Vincent straightened his shoulders and prepared to return to the celebration. He had a role to play, expectations to meet, and a future to secure for everyone who depended on him. Personal happiness was a luxury he had forfeited the day he inherited his father's crown. As he reached for the door handle, Vincent caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass. The man staring back at him looked older than his 35 years, lines of stress etched around his eyes. He wondered if Maria would even recognize him now, if 3 years of carrying the weight of an empire had changed him beyond recognition. Inside, the party continued in full swing, and Vincent Romano, the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld, returned to play the part of the happy groom-to-be. The orchestra had just finished playing a romantic ballad when Vincent noticed the commotion near the ballroom's main entrance. Several guests had turned their heads, whispers rippling through the crowd like water disturbed by a stone. Vincent was in the middle of a conversation with one of his lieutenants about territory disputes when he felt a chill run down his spine, an inexplicable sense that something was about to change forever. Isabella was across the room, surrounded by her bridesmaids and female cousins, all of them discussing wedding plans with the enthusiasm that Vincent wished he could muster. She caught his eye and smiled, raising her champagne glass in a small toast meant just for him. He managed to smile back, but his attention kept drifting toward the entrance where the disturbance seemed to be growing. Tony appeared at his side again, his face pale and serious. "Boss, we might have a problem," he whispered urgently, his hand instinctively moving toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "Someone just walked in who probably shouldn't be here." Vincent's blood turned to ice. His first thought was of rival families, of enemies who might use this public gathering as an opportunity for revenge. The Romano family had plenty of adversaries, and an engagement party full of civilians would be the perfect cover for an assassination attempt. His muscles tensed, ready for action, his mind already calculating escape routes and defensive positions. "Who?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Around them the party continued, but Vincent's world had narrowed to this moment, this potential threat to everything he had built. Tony's expression was strange. Not quite fear, but something else entirely. "You need to see for yourself," he said, gesturing toward the entrance. "But Vincent, maybe you should prepare yourself. This isn't what you're expecting." Vincent's eyes swept the room, searching for any sign of danger, any face that didn't belong among the carefully vetted guest list. The Romano family security was legendary. Every person in this room had been approved, their backgrounds checked and rechecked. How had someone slipped through? Then he saw her and the world stopped. Maria Santos stood near the entrance, her dark hair longer than he remembered, wearing a simple black dress that somehow made her more beautiful than any of the designer gowns surrounding her. But it wasn't her presence that made Vincent's knees nearly buckle. It was the unmistakable curve of her belly beneath the fabric of her dress. She was pregnant, very pregnant, probably 6 or 7 months along. For a moment, Vincent couldn't breathe. The sounds of the party faded to a distant hum, and all he could see was Maria's face, her eyes scanning the crowd as if she were looking for someone. Looking for him. Their gazes met across the crowded ballroom, and the 3 years that had passed between them collapsed into nothing. She looked different, more mature, with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. But her eyes held the same warmth he remembered, the same intelligence that had first drawn him to her. Now, however, there was something else there too, determination, and perhaps a touch of fear. Vincent's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Maria was pregnant. The timing was impossible. They hadn't been together in 3 years, but the way she was looking at him, the reason she had come here tonight of all nights, made something cold and terrible begin to form in his stomach. Is that? Tony began, but Vincent cut him off with a sharp gesture. Not here, he hissed, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes that could turn toward them at any moment. We need to get her out of here before anyone notices. But it was already too late. Don Marconi had spotted the disturbance and was making his way over, his experienced eyes taking in the scene with the sharp attention of a man who had survived 4 decades in a business where information was power. Isabella's mother, Donna Francesca, was also approaching, her face curious and slightly suspicious. Maria began moving through the crowd, and Vincent realized with growing horror that she was walking directly toward him. Every step she took brought her closer to disaster, closer to destroying the careful balance he had spent 3 years building. If anyone discovered who she was, if they learned about their past relationship, it would raise questions that Vincent couldn't afford to answer. "Vincent," Don Marconi called out, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "Is there something we need to discuss?" Vincent forced his expression into neutral lines, calling upon years of practice in hiding his emotions. "Everything is fine, Don Marconi," he replied smoothly. "Just a small matter that needs attention." Maria had stopped about 10 feet away, close enough that Vincent could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way she was working to maintain her composure. She was clearly nervous, but there was steel in her backbone that hadn't been there 3 years ago. Whatever had brought her here tonight, she was committed to seeing it through. Isabella appeared at Vincent's side, slipping her arm through his with the possessive grace of a woman claiming her territory. "Darling, who is our unexpected guest?" she asked, her voice sweet but with an undertone that suggested she missed very little. Vincent felt trapped between 2 worlds that were never meant to collide. On one side stood Isabella, representing duty, family honor, and the future that had been planned for him since birth. On the other stood Maria, carrying secrets that could unravel everything he had worked to build. "I believe the young lady might be lost," Vincent said carefully, each word chosen with precision, perhaps looking for a different event. Maria's eyes flashed with something that might have been hurt or anger. She took another step forward, and Vincent could see that her pregnancy was more advanced than he had initially thought. The realization hit him like a physical blow. If the timing was right, if his worst fears were true, then everything he thought he knew about the last 3 years was a lie. "Excuse me," Maria said, her voice carrying clearly across the small circle of attention she had attracted. Her words were directed at Vincent, but she was speaking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I need to speak with Mr. Romano. It's about something very important that can't wait." The formal way she addressed him wasn't lost on anyone present. Don Marconi's eyes sharpened, and Vincent could practically see the older man's mind working, filing away details that could be useful later. Isabella's grip on his arm tightened almost imperceptibly. Vincent knew he had seconds to control this situation before it spiraled completely out of his grasp. Whatever Maria wanted, whatever had driven her to risk coming here tonight, he needed to handle it away from prying eyes and listening ears. "Of course," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Tony, perhaps you could escort the lady to a more private setting where we can discuss her concerns." But Maria shook her head, her chin lifting with a determination that Vincent remembered all too well. "What I have to say needs to be said directly to you, Vincent," she said, and the use of his first name sent ripples of speculation through the growing audience. "It's about your son." The words hit the gathering like a bomb. Vincent felt the ground shift beneath his feet, felt 3 years of careful planning and political maneuvering crumble in an instant. Around them he could hear the intake of breath, the whispered exclamations of shock and speculation. Isabella's face went white, then red, then white again. Don Marconi stepped forward, his eyes moving between Vincent and Maria with the calculating gaze of a man reassessing everything he thought he knew. The music had stopped, and Vincent realized that the entire ballroom was beginning to focus on their small drama. Maria stood there, her hand resting protectively on her belly, waiting for Vincent's response. In that moment, she looked both vulnerable and incredibly strong, a woman who had decided to claim what was hers regardless of the consequences. Vincent's world, so carefully constructed and controlled, was about to come crashing down around him. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Vincent could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as every eye in the room focused on the unfolding drama. The weight of hundreds of stares pressed down on him like a physical force, each gaze representing years of carefully cultivated relationships that could crumble in an instant. Isabella released his arm as if she had been burned, taking a step backward with a look of betrayal that cut through Vincent like a knife. Her dark eyes, which had sparkled with happiness just moments before, now blazed with fury and humiliation. The Marconi family prided itself on honor and respect, and to be publicly embarrassed at her own engagement party was an unforgivable insult. "Your son?" Isabella repeated, her voice rising in pitch with each word. "Vincent, what is she talking about? Who is this woman?" Don Marconi stepped between Vincent and his daughter, his hand raised in a gesture that commanded silence. His weathered face showed no emotion, but Vincent knew the old man well enough to recognize the dangerous glitter in his eyes. This was a man who had built his empire by reading people, by knowing when to strike and when to retreat. Right now he was gathering information, calculating angles and advantages. "Perhaps," Don Marconi said in a voice that carried absolute authority, "this conversation would be better suited to a more private setting. There are too many curious ears here." But Maria shook her head, her jaw set with a determination that Vincent found both admirable and terrifying. She had come this far, had risked everything to be here tonight, and she wasn't going to be shuffled away into some back room where her words could be denied or dismissed. "I've been private for 3 years, Maria said, her voice steady despite the trembling Vincent could see in her hands. "I've stayed silent while I watched him move on, plan a wedding, build a life that pretended I never existed. But my son deserves better than that. He deserves to know his father." The word father seemed to echo through the ballroom, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and marble walls. Vincent felt the last of his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. The math was simple and devastating. 3 years ago, right before he had ended things with Maria, right before his father's death had forced him to choose between love and duty, Donna Francesca Marconi, Isabella's mother, had appeared at her daughter's side, her face a mask of aristocratic outrage. She was a woman who had navigated the treacherous waters of Mafia politics for 30 years, and she understood immediately what this revelation meant for her family's reputation. "Are you suggesting," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "that our future son-in-law has been hiding a child, that he has been lying to us about his past?" Vincent opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. How could he explain 3 years of deliberate silence? How could he admit that he had known, somewhere deep in his heart, that leaving Maria so abruptly might have consequences? He had pushed the possibility from his mind, burying it beneath layers of duty and necessity. Tony moved closer, his hand hovering near his jacket where Vincent knew he kept his gun. But this wasn't a threat that could be handled with violence. This was the past coming back to claim its due, and all the weapons in the world couldn't protect against the truth. "Is it true?" Isabella demanded, her voice cracking with emotion. "Vincent, look at me and tell me if what she's saying is true." Vincent finally found his voice, though it sounded strange and distant to his own ears. "Isabella, I can explain." "Don't," she said sharply, holding up a hand to stop him. "Don't you dare try to explain this away. Either you have a son with this woman or you don't. Which is it?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Around them, Vincent could see members of both families edging closer, their faces a mixture of fascination and horror. This would be talked about for years, dissected and analyzed until every detail became part of family legend. Maria stepped forward again, her hand still protective over her belly. "His name is Michael," she said quietly, but her words carried clearly in the shocked silence. "Michael Vincent Santos. He's 2 years old and he has his father's eyes." The name hit Vincent like a physical blow. Michael after his own father, Vincent after himself. She had given their son his name, had honored the connection even after he had walked away from them both. The knowledge that he had a son, a child who carried his legacy, was overwhelming. 2 years old, Don Marconi repeated thoughtfully. "That would make him conceived around the time of your father's death, Vincent. An interesting coincidence." Vincent knew there was nothing coincidental about the timing, and from the sharp look in Don Marconi's eyes, the older man knew it too. This wasn't just about a secret child. This was about Vincent's priorities, about where his loyalties had truly lain during one of the most critical periods in his family's history. "Where is the boy now?" Don Marconi continued, his voice deceptively calm. "And why choose tonight of all nights to reveal his existence?" Maria's chin lifted again, and Vincent saw a flash of the spirit that had first drawn him to her. "Michael is safe," she said firmly. "As for why tonight, I wanted Vincent to know what he was walking away from." Again, the accusation in her voice was clear. This wasn't just about revealing the truth. This was about forcing Vincent to confront the choices he had made, the lives he had affected with his decisions. She wasn't just announcing the existence of a child. She was making him face the consequences of his actions. Isabella suddenly laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "This is perfect," she said, her voice rising dangerously. "On the night of our engagement, I discover that my future husband has been keeping a secret family. Do you have any idea what this does to our family's arrangement? What this does to me?" Vincent could see the political ramifications spreading through the room like ripples in a pond. The marriage between the Romano and Marconi families was about more than love. It was a carefully negotiated treaty that affected territories, business arrangements, and the balance of power throughout the city. Maria's revelation didn't just threaten the wedding. It threatened everything Vincent had spent 3 years building. "Isabella, please," Vincent began, but she cut him off with a look of pure fury. "Please what? Please forgive you for making me look like a fool in front of both our families. Please pretend that this doesn't change everything." Don Marconi raised his hand again and the room fell silent. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Vincent," he said slowly, "I think it's time you told us the truth, all of it. Starting with when you last saw this woman and why you chose to keep this information from my family." Vincent looked around the room, at the faces of people who had trusted him, who had believed in his honor and integrity. He saw disappointment, anger, calculation, and worst of all, pity. The empire he had inherited from his father was built on respect and fear, and both were slipping away with each passing second. Maria stood waiting, her dark eyes holding his with a steadiness that reminded him of everything he had lost when he chose duty over love. Beside her stood Isabella, the woman he had promised to marry, her face a mask of betrayed rage. Between them stood the ruins of 3 years of careful planning and political maneuvering. Vincent Romano, the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld, was about to lose everything that mattered to him, and for the first time in years he wasn't sure he had the strength to stop it from happening. Vincent felt the weight of every gaze in the ballroom pressing down on him like a crushing force. The ornate ceiling seemed to be closing in, the crystal chandeliers becoming blinding spots of light that made his head swim. He had faced down rival gang leaders, survived assassination attempts, and negotiated peace treaties that had saved hundreds of lives, but nothing had prepared him for this moment of absolute vulnerability. "The truth," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the deadly quiet room, "is that I loved her. I loved Maria Santos more than I have ever loved anything or anyone in my life." The admission sent another wave of shocked murmurs through the crowd. Isabella's face went completely white, and Vincent saw her sway slightly before her mother's steadying hand caught her elbow. Don Marconi's expression remained unreadable, but Vincent caught the slight narrowing of his eyes. 3 years ago, Vincent continued, finding strength in the truth after years of carefully constructed lies, "My father was dying and our family was under attack from 3 different directions. The Torino family was pushing into our territory from the east. The Castellanos were trying to take over our shipping operations, and the feds were building a case that could have destroyed us all." He looked directly at Maria as he spoke, seeing the recognition in her eyes. She had lived through those terrifying months with him, had seen him come home bloodied and exhausted night after night, had tended wounds that he couldn't let anyone else know about. "My father called me to his deathbed and told me that the only way to secure our family's future was through strategic alliances. He had already been in talks with Don Marconi about a marriage between our families. It wasn't a request. It was an order from a dying man who had spent his life protecting what was ours." Don Marconi nodded slowly, confirming the story. "Your father was a wise man," he said carefully. "He understood that in times of crisis, personal desires must sometimes be sacrificed for the greater good of the family." So I ended things with Maria, Vincent said, his voice growing stronger even as his heart broke all over again. I told her I couldn't see her anymore, that it was over between us. I didn't tell her why, because I couldn't bear to see the understanding in her eyes. Couldn't face the knowledge that she would have accepted it if I had been honest with her. Maria's hand tightened on her belly, and Vincent saw tears gathering in her eyes. You didn't give me a choice, she said softly. You just walked away like I meant nothing to you. Because if I had given you a choice, you would have told me to go, Vincent replied, and the raw honesty in his voice made several people in the crowd shift uncomfortably. You would have understood about duty and family, and you would have let me go with grace and dignity just like you did anyway. And I was too much of a coward to face that kind of forgiveness. Isabella stepped forward, her face a mask of cold fury. How touching, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But that still doesn't explain why you kept the existence of a child secret for 3 years. When did you find out about the pregnancy? Vincent's throat felt raw, but he forced himself to continue. I didn't know, he said simply. I swear on my father's grave I had no idea Maria was pregnant when I left her, and she never told me about Michael. He turned to look at Maria, confusion and hurt warring in his expression. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep him secret all this time? Maria's composure finally cracked and tears began streaming down her face. Because you made it clear that I wasn't part of your world anymore, she said, her voice breaking. You disappeared from my life so completely that it was like you had never existed. I tried to find you, tried to tell you, but your people made it very clear that Vincent Romano was not interested in anything I had to say. Vincent felt his blood turn to ice. What do you mean, my people? I went to your office building 6 months after you left, Maria explained, wiping tears from her cheeks. I was showing, obviously pregnant, and I asked to see you. The man at the front desk. He said you had left instructions that under no circumstances was Maria Santos to be allowed anywhere near you. He said if I tried to contact you again, there would be consequences. Vincent's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He knew exactly who had given those orders, and it hadn't been him. He turned to look at Tony, who had gone pale and was avoiding his gaze. Tony, Vincent said, his voice deadly quiet. Did you know about this? Tony looked like a man facing his own execution. Vincent, I can explain. After you ended things with her, you were a mess. You weren't eating, weren't sleeping, kept talking about calling her back. I thought if she tried to contact you, it would make everything worse. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to protect me, Vincent repeated, his voice rising dangerously. So you kept the existence of my son from me for 3 years? The revelation that Vincent's own right-hand man had been responsible for keeping Maria away sent another shockwave through the room. Don Marconi's expression had shifted from careful neutrality to something much more calculating, and Vincent realized that his mentor was reassessing everything he thought he knew about the Romano family's internal dynamics. I didn't know she was pregnant, Tony said desperately. She never said why she wanted to see you, just that it was important. I thought she was trying to get you back, trying to interfere with the engagement plans. Vincent took a step toward Tony, his face dark with rage. So you took it upon yourself to make that decision for me. You decided that I didn't deserve to know I had a son. The room held its collective breath as Vincent's legendary temper finally began to surface. Everyone present knew stories of what happened to people who betrayed Vincent Romano's trust, and Tony's face showed that he was all too aware of his precarious position. But before Vincent could say anything else, Maria stepped forward again. It doesn't matter now, she said firmly. What matters is that Michael exists and he's your son and he deserves to know his father. Isabella laughed bitterly again. This is all very dramatic, but let's talk about what this really means, she said, her voice sharp with hurt and fury. This woman claims to have Vincent's child, a child that would have a legitimate claim to the Romano family legacy. Do you have any idea what that does to our arrangement? Don Marconi had been silent through most of the exchange, but now he spoke up. Indeed, he said thoughtfully. A male heir changes many things. In our world, blood relationships often take precedence over marriage alliances. Vincent suddenly understood the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about his personal life being exposed. This was about the fundamental power structure of both families. If Michael was truly his son, the boy would be the rightful heir to the Romano Empire, regardless of any marriage arrangements. I want a paternity test, Isabella demanded, her voice cutting through the tension. Before this goes any further, I want scientific proof that this child is actually Vincent's. Maria nodded, her chin lifting with quiet dignity. I would welcome that, she said. I have nothing to hide. Vincent looked around the room at the faces of people who had been celebrating his future just an hour ago. Now they were witnessing the complete unraveling of everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed for. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to do his duty to his family, he had potentially destroyed the very thing he was trying to protect. The woman he loved was carrying his child. The woman he was supposed to marry was humiliated and furious, and the alliance that was supposed to secure his family's future was crumbling before his eyes. Vincent Romano, who had always prided himself on being in control, was about to lose everything that mattered to him. And somewhere in the city, a 2-year-old boy named Michael was sleeping peacefully, unaware that his existence was about to change the balance of power in Chicago's underworld forever. The tension in the ballroom had reached a breaking point. Don Marconi stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone in the room. Enough, he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of leadership. This matter requires discussion among the families, away from public spectacle. He gestured toward a side door that led to a private conference room. Vincent, you will come with me. Miss Santos, you as well. Isabella, Tony, and the other family heads. His eyes swept the crowd of shocked guests. Everyone else will remain here and continue with the celebration, as if nothing has happened. Is that understood? The order was delivered with such finality that no one dared to argue. Vincent felt like a man walking to his execution as he followed Don Marconi toward the conference room. Behind him, he could hear Isabella's mother trying to calm the murmuring guests, her voice bright and false as she encouraged them to continue dancing. The conference room was elegant but stark, with a long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs. It was a place where million-dollar deals were negotiated and life-changing decisions were made. Tonight, it would determine the fate of multiple families and the future of a child who didn't even know his father existed. Don Marconi took his seat at the head of the table, with Isabella sitting rigidly beside him, her face a mask of controlled fury. Maria sat across from them, her hands folded protectively over her belly, while Vincent took a chair between them, feeling like he was trapped in no man's land. Now then, Don Marconi began, his voice calm but dangerous. Let us discuss this situation rationally. Miss Santos, you claim that Vincent is the father of your child. Can you provide any evidence to support this claim beyond your word? Maria reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph, sliding it across the polished table. This is Michael, she said quietly. Judge for yourself. Vincent's breath caught in his throat as he looked at the picture. The little boy in the photograph had dark hair that fell in waves across his forehead, exactly like Vincent's had when he was young. But it was the eyes that truly gave away his parentage. They were unmistakably Romano eyes, the same deep brown that had run in Vincent's family for generations. Isabella leaned forward to look at the photograph, and Vincent saw her face pale further. He looks exactly like you did as a child, she whispered, and there was no denying the resemblance. Don Marconi studied the photograph for a long moment before passing it to the other family members present. The resemblance is striking, he admitted. But as Isabella suggested, we will need scientific confirmation before any decisions are made. Vincent couldn't take his eyes off the photograph. His son. He had a son who was walking and talking, who had been taking his first steps while Vincent was negotiating business deals, who had spoken his first words while his father remained ignorant of his existence. Tell me about him, Vincent said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. Tell me about Michael. Maria's expression softened slightly. He's brilliant, she said, a proud smile touching her lips despite the tense situation. He started walking at 10 months and he's already putting together full sentences. He loves books, especially stories about knights and dragons, and he has this laugh. She trailed off, looking directly at Vincent. He has your laugh. The words hit Vincent like physical blows. He was missing everything, every milestone, every precious moment that he would never get back. Does he ask about his father? He managed to say. Every day, Maria replied, and her honesty was clearly meant to hurt. I tell him that his daddy had important work to do, but that he loves him very much. I never wanted him to think he wasn't wanted. Isabella slammed her hand on the table, the sharp sound making everyone jump. This is all very touching, she said acidly, but let's discuss what really matters here. Vincent, you have been lying to me and my family for 3 years. You've built our entire engagement on deception. Vincent forced himself to look at Isabella, seeing the hurt beneath her anger. She was right. He had deceived her, had led her believe she was marrying a man with no significant romantic history. Isabella, I never meant for things to happen this way. But they did happen this way, she interrupted. And now I have to decide whether I can marry a man who kept something this significant from me. Whether my family can align itself with someone whose loyalty is clearly divided. Don Marconi nodded gravely. The alliance between our families was predicated on trust and mutual respect, he said. This revelation calls both into question. Vincent felt panic rising in his chest. The marriage to Isabella wasn't just about politics. It was about survival. Without the Marconi alliance, the Romano family would be vulnerable to their enemies, easy prey for the Torino family or any number of rivals who had been waiting for signs of weakness. Don Marconi, he began. My father's dying wish was for this alliance. The stability of both our families depends on it. Your father's dying wish was also for you to have an heir, Don Marconi replied shrewdly. It appears you may already have fulfilled that obligation. The implication hung heavy in the air. If Michael was indeed Vincent's legitimate son, it changed the entire dynamic of the family structure. Male heirs carried weight in their world, and blood relationships often trumped political arrangements. Maria spoke up, her voice steady despite the obvious stress she was under. I didn't come here to destroy anyone's plans or arrangements, she said. I came because Michael deserves to know his father, and because Vincent deserves to know his son. Whatever happens between the rest of you, that relationship should exist. And what about the child you're carrying now? Isabella asked pointedly, gesturing toward Maria's rounded belly. I assume Vincent is the father of that one as well? Maria's hand moved protectively to her stomach, and Vincent saw her hesitate for the first time since she had walked into the ballroom. That's complicated, she said finally. Vincent felt his world shift again. What do you mean, complicated? Maria looked down at her hands, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I mean that after 3 years of believing you wanted nothing to do with me or Michael, I tried to move on with my life. There's someone else, Vincent. Someone who has been a father to Michael and who wants to marry me. The words hit Vincent like a sledgehammer. Not only had he lost 3 years with his son, but Maria had found someone else. Someone who was there for her when Vincent was playing politics and building alliances with other women. Who? He demanded, his voice tight with jealousy and pain. Dr. David Chen, Maria replied. He's a pediatric surgeon at the hospital where I work. He's been helping me raise Michael, and we've been together for over a year. Isabella laughed, a sound devoid of humor. So let me understand this correctly, she said. You're carrying another man's child, but you've come here to claim Vincent as the father of your first child and destroy my engagement in the process. Maria's chin lifted defiantly. I came here because Michael has a right to know his real father, regardless of my personal situation. David knows about Vincent, knows that Michael isn't his biological son, and he supports my decision to tell the truth. Vincent felt like he was drowning, overwhelmed by the cascade of revelations. He had a son he'd never met. A woman he'd never stopped loving was with another man, and his carefully constructed future was collapsing around him. Don Marconi stood up, his movement commanding attention from everyone in the room. This situation requires careful consideration, he announced. We will arrange for the paternity test immediately. Until we have those results, all wedding plans are suspended. Isabella gasped, but her father continued without acknowledging her distress. If the child proves to be Vincent's son, then we will need to renegotiate our arrangement accordingly. The existence of a male heir changes many things. Vincent realized that his world had shifted completely in the span of a single evening. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his future, and his family had been turned upside down by the arrival of a woman carrying his past and possibly his destiny. The celebration in the ballroom continued. But for Vincent Romano, the party was over. The real work of rebuilding his shattered world was about to begin. 3 days later, Vincent stood outside a modest apartment building on the south side of Chicago, holding a manila envelope that contained the paternity test results, the scientific confirmation of what his heart had known the moment he saw Michael's photograph. The boy was his son, carrying 99.9% of his DNA and 100% of his legacy. The building was nothing like the mansions and luxury hotels where Vincent usually conducted his business. It was clean but simple, the kind of place where working families raise their children with love instead of money. As he climbed the stairs to the third floor, Vincent felt like he was entering a foreign country. Maria opened the door before he could knock, as if she had been watching from the window. She looked tired but beautiful, her pregnancy now obviously showing even more than it had 3 nights ago. Behind her, Vincent could hear the sound of children's cartoons playing on a television. "The test results?" she asked quietly. Vincent nodded, unable to find his voice. After 48 hours of legal conferences, family meetings, and heated negotiations, this moment felt more important than all of them combined. This was about meeting his son. "He's in the living room," Maria said, stepping aside to let him enter. "I told him that someone very special was coming to visit today." The apartment was small but warm, filled with the comfortable clutter of a family home. Children's toys were scattered across the carpet, and the walls were covered with drawings that could only have been created by a toddler's enthusiastic hand. On the coffee table sat a framed photograph of Maria, with a little boy who was unmistakably Vincent's son. Michael sat on the floor in front of the television, building something elaborate with colorful blocks. When he heard footsteps, he looked up and Vincent felt his heart stop. The child had his eyes, his nose, even the stubborn set of his jaw that Vincent's mother had always said would get him into trouble. "Michael," Maria said softly, "I'd like you to meet someone. This is Vincent. He's your daddy." The little boy studied Vincent with serious eyes that seemed far too mature for his age. "Are you the daddy who had important work?" he asked, his voice clear and articulate. Vincent knelt down to Michael's level, his throat tight with emotion. "Yes," he managed to say. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come see you." Michael nodded gravely as if this explanation made perfect sense to him. "Mama said you were helping people," he said. "Are you done helping them now?" The innocent question cut straight to Vincent's heart. "I'm never done helping people," he said carefully. "But I'm going to make sure I have time to help you too, if that's okay with you." Michael considered this seriously, then picked up one of his blocks and offered it to Vincent. "Do you want to build a castle with me?" As Vincent accepted the block, he felt 3 years of grief and regret begin to transform into something else. Possibility. "I'd like that very much," he said. For the next hour, Vincent Romano, one of the most feared men in Chicago, sat on a carpet building block castles with his son. Michael chattered constantly, telling stories about his toys, his favorite foods, and the books Maria read to him at bedtime. Vincent found himself laughing more genuinely than he had in years. "He's been asking about Dr. David," Maria said quietly when Michael became absorbed in explaining the intricate defenses of his block fortress. "David usually comes by after work to read him a story." Vincent looked up at her, trying to read her expression. "And how do you explain that to him?" "I tell him that Dr. David is a very good friend who loves him very much," Maria replied. "Which is the truth. David has been more of a father to Michael than—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Vincent heard the accusation anyway. He had been absent, by choice and by ignorance, while another man stepped in to fill the role that should have been his. "I want to do better," Vincent said simply. "I want to be part of his life, whatever that looks like." Maria was quiet for a long moment, watching Michael demonstrate how knights defended their castle from dragons. "The engagement," she said finally. "What happened with Isabella?" Vincent's expression darkened. "It's over," he said. "Don Marconi made it clear that the alliance between our families is finished. Isabella wants nothing to do with me, and frankly, I don't blame her. The fallout had been swift and brutal. Within hours of the paternity test confirmation, word had spread through Chicago's underworld that Vincent Romano had a secret son and had lost his engagement in spectacular fashion. The Marconi family had withdrawn their support completely, leaving Vincent more vulnerable than he had been since his father's death. "I'm sorry," Maria said, and he could tell she meant it. "I didn't want to destroy your life." "You didn't destroy it," Vincent replied, looking at Michael. "You gave me back the part of it that actually mattered." Before Maria could respond, there was a knock at the door. She glanced at the clock and sighed. "That'll be David. He said he might stop by early today." Vincent felt his stomach clench with jealousy, but he forced himself to remain calm. This man had been there for Maria and Michael when he wasn't, had stepped up to be a father when Vincent was playing politics and building alliances. Dr. David Chen was not what Vincent had expected. He was younger than Vincent had imagined, probably in his early 30s, with kind eyes and an easy smile that faltered only slightly when he saw Vincent sitting on the floor with Michael. "Dr. David!" Michael jumped up and ran to the man, who scooped him up in a hug that spoke of genuine affection. "Hey, buddy," David said, his voice warm with love. "How was your day?" "I met my daddy," Michael announced proudly. "He helped me build a castle, and he's going to come see me again." David looked over Michael's head at Vincent, and for a moment, the two men studied each other. Vincent expected to see resentment or jealousy, but instead he found something much more challenging: understanding. "I'm glad," David said to Michael, and Vincent could tell he meant it. "That's very special." Maria moved between them, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "David, this is Vincent." "Vincent, this is David." The two men shook hands, and Vincent was surprised by the firmness of David's grip and the directness of his gaze. This wasn't a man who would be easily intimidated or pushed aside. "I think we should talk," David said quietly. "All three of us, about what's best for Michael." Vincent nodded, recognizing that this conversation had been inevitable from the moment he learned about his son. Whatever happened between him and Maria, whatever complicated feelings existed between all of them, Michael's well-being had to come first. As they settled into an awkward triangle around Maria's small kitchen table, Vincent realized that his life had become more complicated than any business negotiation he had ever handled. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Outside, Chicago continued its relentless pace, unaware that in a modest apartment on the South Side, 3 adults were trying to figure out how to build a family from the pieces of their shattered expectations. The Mafia boss, who had lost everything, was about to discover that sometimes the most important victories came not from power or politics, but from the simple act of showing up for the people who needed you most. In the living room, Michael continued building his castle, humming softly to himself, blissfully unaware that the adults in his life were working to build something even more important: a future where he could be loved and protected by everyone who mattered to him, regardless of how complicated their relationships might be. For Vincent Romano, this was just the beginning of the most important negotiation of his life.